My name is Brian Kwanwood. It's a real pleasure to welcome Jasa McKenzie and Farid from Documenta and from Ruangrupa. I regret that Lara Khaldi from the Documenta 15 artistic team is not able to join us. She had urgent matters to attend to, so we wish her well in the meantime. I am the Director of Research at the MA Curatorial Practice program, and on behalf of the chair, Stephen Henry Madoff, who is here, we'd like to welcome you all very much. This is a kind of a fun and kooky format for dealing with the upcoming Documenta. I think it was Farid who generously proposed that we design the discussion today around the around questions from our students in the program. So that will be the kind of framing for it. And more generally, I will just briefly introduce our discussion today. The global pandemic has dramatically changed the way we live, work, and think together, but Ruangrupa, the Jakarta-based artist collective responsible for the upcoming Documenta 15, considered the most important of all international exhibitions, has actively explored many of these questions long before COVID-19 struck. Their Documenta is highly anticipated for its global insights, not only into how we can think about change in pandemic times, but also about how art and exhibitions will reflect our ever greater need for collectivity in life and work. And it's also, I should mention, a real pleasure to have Jasa with us, because Jasa is an alum of the MA Curatorial Practice program. So, it's really wonderful to have all of this go full circle. For just sort of technical disclaimers, I just want to warn everyone in the audience to try to keep your mics muted. If you are unmuted, the meeting is being recorded. If you unmute yourself, you may be included in the recording. Not the worst thing, but you could be sealed into the recording forever. So just be aware of that in case you do unmute yourself. It would be nice at the end to leave around 15 minutes, about quarter or 10 minutes to the hour. It would be nice to have some questions from the audience as well. So be prepared for that. I'll send a little chat message and we'll take questions within the chat. And I think that is everything. Welcome, Jasa. Welcome, Farid. I will pass it to you, Farid.
Thank you very much, Brian and Stephen and the department to have us this time. Yeah, sorry as well for the absence of Lara, but yeah, I think it's gonna be okay with me. At least I'm not alone. I'm with Jasa as well here, and then Jasa and me hopefully can address certain questions that came from the students. Thank you very much for that. And then I'll try to kind of like talk about our journey so far, let's say, from Ruangrupa side, and then relating it to Documenta in the end, because like it's important to see Documenta 15, at least for Ruangrupa from our perspective. It's not a single event, but it's a continuation of something. So with that said, I think I can start screen sharing. There are some videos I want to share, but I'll talk over it, and then from hopefully I can answering some, maybe not all, but some of the general directions of the questions that were given before by the students. But then in the end, I think if I forget about answering some stuff, it's feel free to revisit those questions. And I think because this is collective history as well, and then the history and journey that Jasa is a part of already as well right now, then please, Jasa, if you want to add something in the middle of my talk, then feel free to do so.
All right.
Without further ado, I'll just I'm sorry if anyone has seen this video before, which I'm going to talk over, but I cannot assume that everyone from your side knows about Ruangrupa. So Ruangrupa is a artist collective founded in 2000 by Jakarta art students mainly at that moment, and then a lot of us didn't even finish the degree at that moment, but then we became artists, etc., etc. I wasn't one of the founders. I knew them around 2003 when I was still a student, when they were still doing this kind of stuff on the street of Jakarta, mainly, or public spaces, or the other way around, is when the working space or studio is on a desktop size. So it's either as big as the city public space or the desktop, like video and music, etc. Those things that you can do on your desk. It's because like Jakarta is very, very expensive, one of the most expensive places in Indonesia, at least. So space is something that's kind of contested. So we started with renting houses. We moved around. We're not alone in it. Like a lot of other collectives in Indonesia started this way, and then change what's considered to be domestic into a more public use. And then I think it's important to underline as well, because of the questions. It's like, and we ask these questions a lot as well from, like, when we come to Europe or other places, Japan, like we learn from other collectives as well, before us and then after us, and our our contemporaries. The fact that we didn't establish ourselves to prove a certain kind of theory, but we're just like doing it because it's the way we knew how to do things. We knew how to access certain things by ganging up together. It's kind of like help us from the beginning. So we kind of like not tied to a certain type of methods, let's say, or theories, or like political factions, maybe even. So for example, like horizontality and how to deal with group dynamics, we kind of like absorb that as if it's a part of life, because like hierarchies can happen everywhere as well, even like in regular social settings. And then how to deal with it is much more important than to erase that from the get-go, try to avoid it, let's say. So that's why we're doing stuff as well with the people that is our friends directly. That's why the things that you see right now, Jakarta 32 and OK Video, for example, we started as a group of friends who were interested in doing stuff. So OK Video came about because like we thought at that moment that no one was talking about video art in our context the way we wanted to talk about it. We didn't know that much about video art, the way how it's like, supposed to be talked about, etc. But we use actually this kind of like platform that we established ourselves to be able to invite other voices, learn from those voices, make it international, and all those kind of stuff. Jakarta 32 is a forum for students, and then it's a way for us to gang students from different kind of backgrounds at the same time, at the same place. Because at that moment, students from different universities and different disciplines didn't have a place to meet, let's say. So we made it into a forum, and then it just happened that we could access as well the spaces like National Gallery. So it's kind of like have that type of things, you know, just like to give spaces for those who need that, let's say. And then around 2007, I think, the kind of like people from outside of our own context started to be interested in our practice. It's not the first time, like, you know, like this things that you saw, that you're seeing in your screen. It's one of our participations in biennials, you know, like all those kind of stuff. We learn how those circuits are run from our participations in it. This one is in Australia, Asia Pacific Triennial, which we kind of like, we use our interest at that moment and our network about music. In this case, a band called The Kuda, a punk band from Bogor, a city next to Jakarta, and then kind of like use and innovate, fictionalize their history as if there's like a history, a shared history with punk, a movement in Australia around the 70s. So we kind of like create a museum inside a museum, sometimes fictional, sometimes it's not, and then like mix it all up together with also performances, etc. So we like to do that. We actually kind of like miss doing something like that. It's much more like what you're saying right now. It's our participation in Sao Paulo Biennial. Like this route has been taken a lot of times by us lately, like kind of like move our space, part of our space, to somewhere else in order to work with the local ecosystem. So we mix, we invite other artists to exhibit in our designated space, not only from Indonesia, but mainly also from Sao Paulo itself. So our research trip, let's say, for this type of biennials, usually just like to meet people and then whether there's a possible collaborations happen there. So our part of libraries can be used for workshop, our part of gallery can be used for exhibitions, etc., etc. And then people ask us a lot of times, including in our localities, like why are we still doing things that we are doing? For example, like this, like making music festivals. We didn't have the separations in our head because like modern project has never been that successful in Indonesia, at least. So separations of disciplines, etc. Is not embedded, it's not installed in naturally in our head. So we kind of like mix everything all together. And then looking back, it's a way for us to kind of like connect things together, of course. And then also it's one is an alibi, as I said, a lot of our events are an alibi to move and meet and talk about certain things or with new friends, old friends, and keep on the friendships going, but also kind of like connecting or speaking to a much more broader public, let's say, because music, at least in our youth group is still something that we can use and we are sincerely interested in, let's say. So it's a way for us also to address what we're interested in to different publics, etc., and fighting for space as well, because sometimes we just like found a voice that needed to be supported, whether it's, then we kind of like, we find ways to showcase that, because that's where they are lacking. At least in Indonesia, it's not that like, you know, a lot of platforms are not made for new and emerging voices, at least before 2010. So that's where our sensibility came from, let's say. And then I'll just like move to the next one that I can speak about. Around 2015, 2016, because there are a lot of collectives in Indonesia. And then after moving several times from house to house, and then again, like we're not alone in it. We're kind of like, we realized that we all spend a lot of time, a lot of our resources, budget actually, not time, but money, in paying rent. And then through other activities, like not only for our collective, but also our involvement in other institutions like Jakarta Biennial, we found a way to access certain resources that we can share together. So in 2016, between 2016 to 2018, we found an opportunity to occupy this big space in the middle of Jakarta. And then of course it's too big for Ruangrupa to take it alone. And then this is the moment when we found the notion of collective of collectives, that's one. And we experimented with it. What does it mean? How to actually share other resources together. It's also the first time, if you're familiar with the term lumbung, which is the working title of Documenta 15, this is also the first moment when we kind of like use that term. The term is very vernacular for Indonesian. Every Indonesians know what lumbung is. They also have their own understanding of it. But the way we use it, at least, is it's a shortcut, as a metaphor, as an analogy for a common pot of resources that we can share with each other, and also hopefully larger than that. So space in this case is one. If we can share space, then we continue sharing other things, ourselves, knowledge, time, etc. And then because of this, we continue our kind of like conversations. But before that, I think I want to revisit our connection to other parts of the world, let's say. Although I wouldn't call it global, but at that moment, I think we still understood it as a global art world. But we revisited it for Documenta, which I will come back later. But this type of exhibitions, this time it Salzburg in 2016. They invited us to curate. So this is the first time us as a collective curate something outside of our context, outside of Indonesia, at least, you know. So none of us were trained properly as curators, but curators is kind of like a new a relatively new species in Indonesian art ecosystem. I think it's around in the mid 2000, people started to use popularly, the term curators being used popularly, but we realized the need of that type of practice by doing it ourselves. As you said, as I've said before, like, you know, the events that we're making and the discourses that we needed to make, curators were needed. So before or during the popularity, like the start of the popular notions of curators in our ecosystem, we started doing workshops and short workshops and intensive discussions about what curator can be, art criticism, art writing, etc. So we learn by doing how to do this type of things, how to curate as well, you know. This time around in 2016, it's a bit still like an exhibition, let's say. We invite artists, there's venues, there are venues, and then we just like, you know, stage things. Maybe the different or the push is just like we want every artist to make a space, and then the venue, or the main venue is a park, so everyone can come for free, etc. So we ask the artists to make a space that people can not only see but experience. And then after that, during the opening days, we had an open call for everyone, actually, for a bigger public, how to use that space, not entirely dependent on how the artist intended to be. So, like, you know, something as banal as yoga, weddings, yoga sessions, birthday parties, all those kind of stuff, we're just open to be used for the works to be used that way. Not every artist were happy about this situations, but it's okay. We also should not, like, you know, shy away from conflicts and unhappiness and say as if everything is like a walk in the park and flowery, you know. So from that, during those kind of development, so there's like our own development back home here, and then also like the opportunities being available for us outside of our own context. We had to find the balance. We realized, I think around 2017, after doing Soundsback, we realized that we got taken for a lot of time, I think a year or so, by another agenda, which is not entirely ours. So we don't want to repeat that. We learned from Soundsback experience, and then we don't want to repeat that anymore. That's why I think, like Lumbung, we kind of like throw it as an invitation back for Documenta, whether at that moment around the end of 2018, as an invitation back, whether Documenta would be interested in taking that journey as well together with us. At that moment, we just established this thing called Good School, this latest iteration of ours, let's say. It's called Good School. It's a collective of collectives as well, established by Ruangrupa, Grafis Suruhara, and Serum. And then we were preparing ourselves, in this case Ruangrupa, to be much more in the background. We want to be Good School, and we want to look for ways to do things as Good School, you know. But then Documenta came. We thought it was like a long shot. We were surprised that, like, you know, something like Documenta, we knew what Documenta before, but from a distance. But we were surprised that something like that actually were interested in something like us, you know, because we realized from the beginning it's a two separate habits, traditions, and different type of doing institutions, let's say. And then we were also in the beginning phase of looking for other iterations. Good School we established as an informal educational platform. So although a lot of times collective has become one of the main ways to do art in Indonesia, it hasn't been reflected by proper educational institutions, let's say formal educational institutions. They're still doing things in the old way, the way we call it, like looking for individual geniuses, all those kind of stuff. Although it's like for us, it's not reflecting our reality. So it's not against the formal educational system, but it's running in parallel, at least from our point of view. We can kind of like supplement things with our way of thinking and our way of doing. And then the way we want to take documenta this way is like that, like we should not be extracted by the event itself. We should be able to continue our conversation, our interest further beyond 2022. And then we're trying to use the opportunity to test whether our way of doing things can be also absorb our network outside of Indonesia. So kind of like enlarge our homework, let's say. So Lumbung became the working title for Documenta 15. This is pre-pandemic time, so we were thinking that we could, visit other contexts that finally we could. We're the things that we can only understand at that up until this moment from a distance, like a lot of like having Indonesian passports, of course, maybe some of you understand, it kind of like put a barrier or like at least access and ease towards certain contexts that we cannot visit that easily. And then therefore, although we have friends from that context, we cannot understand how the context kind of like form their practices properly and all those kind of stuff. But then for better or worse, the pandemic happened. And then we decided, first and foremost, there are, of course, there's good and bad things about everything. The good thing is like we realized that like solidarity, working together, all those kind of stuff should not be postponed, but even actually to be accelerated, because a lot of friends that we're trying to work with kind of like came to very precarious conditions. So it's timely, let's say, to do something like documenta, an edition like documenta, that try to be not to reproduce the extraction or that it usually has, like flying everything to Kassel or like somewhere else. But then the question is like, what does it bring back to the other ecosystems and the other context? Then so we can answer that kind of like much more straightforwardly. The resistance towards that idea is not that strong. But then the very bad thing is just like we couldn't, or we still can't do stuff that we wanted to do, which kind of like have physical meetings, which is very, very important in our type of practices, and also the practices that we are working with to imagine what Documenta 15 could be. And then, as you can, like, this is a quick kind of like illustration of how we see Documenta 15 again. Like it should be a journey, which Documenta 15 this year in the summer act as a stop, an important stop, but it should not be the only stop. Hopefully it will happen that way. And then the journey continues. We learned a lot so far, how to do things for, again, not without challenges, but at least the people we have met so far kind of like has been refueling us as well. Not only from the artists, Lumbung members, etc., but also extensions of that from the ecosystem of Kassel, for example, another local that we have to take, that it has become our locale as well, up until, you know, new friends we've met along the way and working closely right now, although a lot of times it's in Zoom, like Jasa here. It's kind of like adding a lot of colors to Ruangrupa's practice, at least, if not more than that. And then hopefully we can continue somehow the lessons that we've learned in that way. And then I have to kind of like underline the last thing maybe this time that I want to underline is like this is a multiplicity of voices, and then we realized Lumbung is not a theme, it's not an overarching umbrella that kind of like swallow everything. So instead of global ways of doing things like that, we understand Lumbung as like a connection between locals or interlocals, let's say, we call it, on everyday basis. And then after that, I think like the authorship of a lot of collective practices and also lessons from Documenta 15 and beyond, all those kind of stuff, can also go not necessarily with our close context to us, in this case Ruangrupa, you know, people, including the visitors. Documenta 15 should be like a public harvest celebrations of the processes that far, and then if someone wants to take it further in their own way, iterate that and all those kind of stuff, so people can experience positivity, hope, etc. I think that's the most important offers that we can give, at least for now. And then the success, I think it's there. The parameter of success from our side is there, like what type of feelings can people take, and hopefully it's the positive, the hopeful side of things, because we were punk once, and then I think from Ruangrupa, and then I think we think the most punk thing we can do right now is to be joyful and hopeful, let's say. I think I'm going to give the mic to Jasa before opening it up further. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Farid. And I think that you are still punk, all of you. Thank you for that presentation. It was, I hadn't seen all this footage before, and seeing these past iterations or these kind of, you know, this development of ruangrupa and your concept of Lumbung and how you work is really giving a good preview for what people can expect in Kassel. And it was really interesting for me to see kind of what I know now in the present in reverse, and see this because it was kind of introduced to us as here's everything kind of on a plate, and we had all of your knowledge that you presented to us, you know, in 2021. And so it's interesting to see the development of that, and how your iterations in Jakarta are, I think, going to look so much like what we're going to see in Germany next year. And the process of Lumbung and how we really reflect that. Not only, it's not just a theme or like something that we're prompting the artist to do, but it's something that we've also taken on where we work in Ru House. And it's something that goes through us as collaborators with ruangrupa, as employees of Documenta and under the wing of the Frederizianum. And it's something that is also going into the production and the technical thinking and how we work with each other. We're also taking on these linear Lumbung values and always questioning, why are we doing this? Is it because it's the way that was always done before? Is that necessarily the best way to do it? So yes, it's very demonstrative that your process has really soaked in here in Germany. And I think that will really stand out next year or this year. Oh my goodness, it's 2022. This year when we open as well.
Maybe because there are some questions that I might forget to answer, but one way to answer it, maybe you can talk about Ruru House, because you know Kassel better than me by now. And then how do you see what Ruru House is, maybe because not everyone knows. And then what's your take on Ruru House? Maybe it's very useful for us to hear.
Sure. So Ru House is where we work. It's right in the center of Kassel, across from the Frederizianum, which is has always been the center or the heartbeat of Documenta. And it's right in kind of the middle square. And right now it's got, like this behind me, the identity of Documenta 15. So it's painted with yellows and purples and greens, and it really stands out very prominently. And it's kind of a reclaimed warehouse and office space. And I know that it was, at least kind of the street level part was supposed to be a living room for the city of Kassel to be able to provide this space for people to be together. But because of pandemic issues, of course, that couldn't continue. But despite the pandemic, it has been a second home for a lot of people. It's been a very, we enact safety precautions, of course, but it has been a really great meeting place. Those of us working there are really coming from all over the world. Ruru House is kind of this reflection of the Lumbung spirit of gathering people together. And also a lot of local collectives have been really welcomed into our space and use it as well. People have been able to suggest events and art shows from the general public. And then it comes to us and we all talk about, is it appropriate for our space? Is it safe to do that kind of a thing? So it's really been a way for lots of people to meet not only artists coming from all over the world, not only workers coming to share knowledge in the production, but also a lot of local community groups in Kassel to come together as well.
Thanks, Jasa. Maybe it's a good time to give it to the students and also the rest of the audience. Maybe we missed in answering some of your questions, or you have further questions.
Yeah, I think your presentation, thanks both of you. Oh, and I think we should all thank Farid, especially because it's past midnight for him, and so it's really heroic that you are with us at this crazy hour from Jakarta. But I think you guys addressed a lot of the questions from the students, but maybe I would just highlight one thing, and maybe after this, if any students in the program feel that their questions were not addressed, we could also take those. But I wanted to highlight something that existed in many of the questions, because the students generally seemed very curious about the kind of mechanics of collective work, and how ruangrupa works as a collective of artists, but also as directors, as curators in documenta or in Sunspec, for that matter. I imagine that there must be a certain kind of an embrace of chaos or disagreement or productive use of chaos, right, or ambiguity. I wonder in response to this and the kind of mechanics of collectivity, I wonder how. I think maybe it could also be a question for Jasa, for who's not in ruangrupa but is working on this very large project together with you guys.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think Jasa's take on this, actually, I want I can learn from as well, because like she, as she said, she got in when it's already like this is a collective work, and then of course this is not without challenges. Conflicts are happening almost every day, if not every day, and then at least from our side, as I said before, we we know how to do things maybe much more horizontal than a lot of other things, but it's not, we know that relations of power cannot be unchecked just by saying that it's collective, let's say, so, and then how it happens, a lot of times it's in different ways, and then we have to be sensitive about it and just like tackle it when it happens, because like a lot of designing how to tackle problems, we just don't come from that approach, let's say. And then it is push and pull. Like we're lucky because we know each other for a long time. Like this is talking about ruangrupa. We know about each other for a long time. So there are a lot of like unsaid things that we can understand between each other, that's why the last thing is like the football I showed was like the football field with 4 goals, because a lot of times we think ourselves as playing total football, so it's kind of like confusing, not only for the opponents but also for ourselves. But in order to be able to do so, we have to trust each other so well, like if someone is in a bad mood, how to deal with it, or whether not to deal with it right now, but and all those kind of stuff. And then this is the time as well to say, I think for us, we realize that collective is a way to do things differently, but not the only way to do things as well, because collective needs time and sensitivity to scale as well. Like if it's too big, it's deemed to fail. So we have to take care of the scale first. And then a lot of time we just like waste, for the lack of better word, because decisions cannot be made on time. Jason knows this really well, I think, by now. Maybe it's frustrating as well for a lot of people dealing with us in that sense, like how the meetings is not like straightforward, sometimes like lateness in the meeting, and like but we have to open our heart and patience as much as possible. And then even then decisions cannot be made on time, but decisions made outside of the meeting itself, when someone is talking, us having a cigarette break somewhere else, and then it has to be communicated and all those kind of stuff. But one thing that I can say is that, like to close this, I think, before giving it again to Jasa, because I'm interested in hearing from her, just don't face the problems, I think, and then be open to it, because the humility from our side is just like we don't know everything as well. That's why also we invite others to imagine what a documenta edition can be, for not only for us, because we know the answers for us maybe, but then for other contexts as well, and everyone has different answers to it. Something like an experiment like collective pot, what is one big experiment we're doing, a big source of headache as well, I have to say, but it's a pot of funds that like we kind of like saved from documenta budget for to be decided. The use itself needs to be decided by not only one collectives or one artist, but together. So we force collectivity as well in our artists and members. The answers to it, how to use it and all those kind of stuff, at least so far, this is still in discussion, but it has been also refreshing for us. And it's a learning process, and then a learning process in how to push collectivity when it becomes interlocal, at least from our side. Sorry, I've talked too much, but Jasa, please take over.
I think this, really idea of collective practice, it's like you said, it does bring you a lot of humility, and it has made me feel very kind of on par, like on team with the artists. I'm like me and the production person that I work with closely, and the A team member who happens to be, or artistic team member that happens to be working on my project. Like, it really kind of feels like we're all on the same team to make these projects happen. And it brings this mode of horizontality that comes from recognizing everybody's knowledge, and that everyone is bringing something equal to the table, and we all have different skills. And so even though I'm working with a lot of people, I'm working with artists from all 6 continents, and we don't know each other's experiences, and we don't, all like have architectural skills, or some people aren't, art organizers or something. Maybe they don't have access to the kind of, I don't know, things that Documenta can provide in the Western world and a highly funded exhibition can provide. But it's really, we are in awe of them, and it doesn't feel like, it really puts us all on kind of this even, I don't know, level of power, level of just acknowledging that everybody's different knowledges and skills that they bring to the table are all part of the project as well. And so I think that's going to deliver some really interesting projects, and it's been making the working experience very open and friendly. And I feel like we're making relationships with these artists that are also going to last past the 100 days.
That's wonderful. Thanks, guys. I guess maybe I'll just, since we have only about 10 minutes left, and I have a couple of questions coming in. Maybe if any of our students in the program feel that their question, they have a burning question that's not addressed, feel free to unmute and jump in. In the meantime, there is a question there are a couple of questions from David, but I think I'll focus on one that's also related to something that one of our students asked. And David writes, Global South is a topic that is noted briefly in many reviews and descriptions of the interlocal Lombong collectives about the way that the events and artists are mapped. How do you define Global South in the context of Documenta 15? And what connections between apparent isolated geographies and contexts have you found along the making process until today? It's maybe also a bit related to a question that Yindi Chen asked, which I think is quite interesting, about how ruangrupa responds to the notion of Southeast Asia. Have you confronted any issues with this often used geological generalization?
Yeah, thank you for that. As you said, no, like Global South, something like Southeast Asia as well. It's like a construct that it's useful sometimes, but sometimes it's also a trap. Like we understand we like to call it, just because for a lack of better term, it's like formerly known as Global South, FKA Global South, you know, because it was useful. We understand, like, you know, coming from Indonesia with the Bandung Conference, non-aligned movement, where the South was coined, one of the first places it was coined, that it was useful at that moment. But to repeat or to reproduce the differences between North and South, we learned even before Documenta, I think, like, there's a trap in it, let's say. What connect us, I think, like South to South, you know, like South to South networks and all those kind of stuff, it's happening, but it's not enough, because, like, even coming to Southeast Asia, this is kind of like an anecdote that we all like to share. Like, if I want to meet someone from Myanmar or from Cambodia, you know, sometimes it's easier for us to meet in Europe, just because of the weirdness of the funding logics, let's say, like in Germany, in the Netherlands, in France, whatever, or in the States, or in Japan as well, in South Korea. We realize that it has to change, as let's say, some of the local actors in Southeast Asia, we kind of like, we realize the contribution cheap airlines at that moment, like around the beginning, like in around mid 2000, has contributed to it. So people from Malaysia can come to Indonesia much more easily, etc. You know, because the cheap airline operating between that thing, you know. And then Southeast Asia as well as a construct, it's not very fixed for us. Maybe some people don't want to agree with this, but like Hong Kong, Taiwan, we include them to Southeast Asia as well. A lot of our Hong Kong artist friends are in agreements with this. But then, of course, then it becomes like, you know, one is the formal way of addressing Southeast Asia with ASEAN, for example, and then the other way is just like culturally what's happening, you know, and all those kind of stuff. And then, but back to the South thing, we have to be careful when from our side, we have to be careful to use that term, so we're not labeled that easily. Because one thing that we continue doing is to avoid easy labeling to our practice, you know. So far we've been okay, like we can confuse the labels, but South is one of the labels that we have to be careful in using. When it's useful, but then it's not always. And also the last thing I want to say is the way we look into the collaborators, the artists, the members, people we are working with, etc. We deliberately say to ourselves and remind ourselves in the process not to be trapped by geography, let's say. We are not looking for representations from the Pacific. We're not looking for representations from East Africa, for example, you know, and all those kind of stuff. It's not about representations, but the practice itself, I think, like what Jasa said before. This is a certain type of processes, and then there are people that just like don't fit that process, you know, and then it helps, like the question becomes like, are they the people you want to hang out with for at least 2 years, if not more, you know? So that that kind of question is kind of like important for us as well. The geographical representations is also kind of like a trap that we realize we have to be aware of, but also to challenge, let's say. That's why when the artist list came out, when we're done with the artist list, it's surprising for even for every one of us individually, because like we cannot read it neatly, let's say. It leaves a big question mark in everyone's of our in everyone's heads. Jasa, maybe you want to add something?
No, Farid, but it's kind of interesting as you were talking, a question came in, and I think you inadvertently answered it and how you were explaining ruangrupa and your outlook on geography.
Yeah, it was a very good question from our student Kevin Wu. I wonder if maybe as a final question and to close our discussion for today, maybe I'll just read it, and if you have a short response, we can sneak that in. So Kevin Wu writes, "Thank you for your presentation, Farid and Jasa. I read that Documenta 15 is naming the artist's time zones instead of countries and grouping them according to cosmologies and quotes. And I'm really intrigued by these choices that to some extent downplay or bypass national borders and identities. In my view, biennials are frequently haunted by nationalism and often fall short on addressing diasporic experiences, the plurality of cosmologies as globalization and capitalism smooths over the differences, etc. My question is a little abstract. How is the world, or in parentheses, worlds, being reconceived through the framework of Documenta 15? What is its relationship to the worlds? It's a small detailed question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And noting that as well, like the time zones. I think the time zones is this is a funny way to answer it. It's like the time zones is a direct consequence of Zoom, of constant zooming, no? Like we have to count everyone's time zones, and then some collectives or some artists are not neatly, as well as you already make it clear that like it's not neatly fall into geographical representations, but at least there's like a base where they're coming from. Where during our past events we address them by series, but this time it's kind of like this is Zoom era, that's why we're using time zones, as well as like some people kind of like not coming from one series, but like multiplicities as well. With the world, I think like it relates to one of the working groups, one of the most active working groups that we have in Documenta 15. It's the working group is called Where is the Art Working Group, trying to answer that, because that's question like a lot of us have been posed and then joke around with. We realized to answer that is by exactly that, like what you call cosmologies. We have to make a bridge on like why you're seeing the type of art you're seeing right now is through the cosmologies. Where do we come from? You know, where are we coming from? And then this is you correct. Yeah, correctly. You're also kind of like refer to it in plural. So cosmologies and worlds as well, because when me and Jasa met Fafswag, for example, from Aotearoa or New Zealand, there although it's closer from Indonesia, we know that like it's a worlds apart. What they're how they conceive things as well, you know. And then we have stereotypes towards New Zealand, etc. But it's how they bring themselves, their cosmologies that they live, and then also with their bodies, you know, incorporate in their bodies, the way they speak, the language that they use, all those kind of stuff. Only like meeting them sometimes in an hour through Zoom, etc., etc. Every time I learn something new. So hopefully we can also kind of like we are generous enough as a group, Documenta 15 and group of artists, you know, generous enough to give that bridge as well, and then so people can feel what I was referring to. Maybe using FAFSWAG is a segue to Jasa's comments as well on this question.
I mean, also to jump in, but speaking of meeting for just an hour on Zoom, it's also past 1 a.m. for you in Jakarta, Farid.
Yeah, no problem. Hello from tomorrow. But yeah, if we can end it shortly, it's fine. It's totally fine. But please, Jasa, maybe you have a closing remarks. It would be great.
Sure. FAFSWAG is a great example of someone that we're really getting the chance to share in their knowledge of. They have a wonderful practice and it's very body-based. And so we're learning not only about this culture that doesn't get a lot of representation in like Europe and this kind of mainstream art world culture. But then again, that could be said for a lot of projects. And something that's interesting about the time zones is, you know, kind of that it goes vertically, where when you think of grouping the world, we're taught to think about grouped by language and especially by continent. You know, you think of like the West, North America and Europe and Asia and Oceania, But in thinking about things in this kind of longitudinal way, these groups, because they're not lining up in these, you know, maybe by theme, because, you know, from here we can be in Germany, but also I'm in the same time zone as people from Africa. And, you know, as you go down, like New Zealand is in line with, I don't know, kind of almost no one, just because they're so far out on the ocean. But it's an interesting way of lining people up, because we think of the world, I think, more horizontally in terms of global South, global North, or the Western Hemisphere, Eastern Hemisphere. So there are ruangrupa and documenta 15 is really just kind of getting all these usual ways of thinking of the world and all these usual lines and connections that we make between places and what those mean and the languages and the cultures and what those people's experiences are, and just kind of scribbling the connections between them all over. So it's really just shaking kind of everything up, and everyone's getting a chance to share and be with each other.
Great, thank you, Jasa, and thank you, Farid, thank you for your time and for your generosity for being with us. I wonder if everyone is comfortable, we can also unmute and give them a small microphone round of applause from our.
Thank you very, very much, everyone, for having us and, you know, sharing the resources and time as well with us.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So,
thank you, Jasa.
Thank you. Take care and be well, everybody. We hope to be able to host you in Kassel this year for Documenta 15.
hopefully see you all in the summer in
See you
person.
then.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Have a nice day.